My name's Graeham with Intero Real Estate, and we're talking to...
My name is Mark Dinan. I'm a candidate for East Palo Alto City Council. I've lived in East Palo Alto for about 15 years. I am a small business owner. I am the chair of the Public Works and Transportation Commission, which is a volunteer body and a rotating chair position. I'm active in the community in all sorts of ways. I have, most people know me for having the East Palo Alto Neighbors Facebook page.
Awesome. That sounds good. That sounds good. So I wanted to kind of just start off with and just ask you, what's your overall, I guess, vision for East Palo Alto? You know, where do you see things currently? Where would you like to take them in terms of just the city as an overall kind of concept?
East Palo Alto is a good place to live, but it can be a lot better. Right? You have to leave East Palo Alto to do anything. You know, go grocery shopping, to get your car fixed, to go to your job, or do any of the things that we spend money on every day. Go out to eat at a restaurant, go on a date, right? Yeah. East Palo Alto doesn't have any of that, and it has a lot of potential. But we've had a city council that's been blocking everything for about 20 years. So there hasn't been any new market rate housing built, you know, apartments. There hasn't been any investment in small business space so that our local restaurants can go from being in a food truck to being in a actual restaurant. And, you know, we have a city council that, you know, kind of has a scarcity mindset. And even though we have $149 million in the bank, they're not spending money on things like Parks and Rec, which is a normal thing for any city to have. And there's a lot we can do, and you need people on council who are actually going to point the way forward, not try to hold us back to a time in the past that doesn't exist anymore. And you know, we need to build a lot more housing to accommodate all the people who are already living in East Palo Alto and the people who want to live there. We need to really invest in the city, and that's, you know, sidewalks, that's roads, that's parks.
I'd love to see sidewalks. I know what you're saying.
Yeah, right. I mean, you know, one of the reasons why we have just terrible traffic in the morning is because all the kids can't walk and bike to school. Because it's not safe. There's not sidewalks. There's not bike lanes, protected bike lanes. It creates terrible traffic in the morning. Yeah. And, you know, we can fix that kind of thing. And, you know, it's the same thing, investing in clean water. There's parts of the city that do not have good water system. And the water is groundwater, and that water is contaminated. We as a city should be making it a priority to make sure that everybody has you know, clean water, that you don't have to buy water. You don't have to filter your water. You can drink it out of the tap just like, you know, all the customers of Veolia do. You can filter it if you want, but you don't need to, you know, 99.9% of the time, you don't need to do anything. You can just drink it out of the tap like people in Menlo Park and Palo Alto.
Or San Francisco.
Or San Francisco, anyway. Yeah, you know, it's the same water. So we have the water supply. We should do that. You know, I think there's a lot the city can do. And, you know, Parks and Rec department, right? Why don't we have a Parks and Rec department? I mean, that's, you know, a question. When I ran in 2022, I threw it out there, and I just sort of thought this was so obvious that maybe somebody would pick it up and they'd run with it. They'd create a Parks and Rec department. But if you don't have a Parks and Rec department, you know, it means that you're, you know, Martin Luther King and Jack Farrell Park are going to continue to look like they did in like 1975, right? Yeah. I don't think there's been any investment in these parks in the last, you know, 25, 30, 40 years. You're not going to have music in the parks. You're not going to have regular celebrations like 4th of July or the 16 de Septiembre, which is, you know, Mexican Independence Day, or any of this stuff. You might have haphazard things that come up once in a while, but we need to create a Parks and Rec department, hire a Parks and Rec director, and budget for it, and make sure that there's a part of the budget every year that goes for it. I mean, we have a $35 million budget, and very little of it goes for Parks and Rec. You know, there's just a tremendous amount we can do as a city that we're not doing right now. The city's priority seems to be stopping development, not encouraging development that would bring in the restaurants that people want, or the stores, the, you know, all of the amenities that you have to leave East Palo Alto to live your life, including jobs. And, you know, people want that. If you go around, like I have, knocking on doors, you'll talk to people and they'll be like, they're really angry about Target closing. And, you know, Target closes, and it means that a parent who runs out of diapers or needs to get Pedialyte can't just pop over to Target in 5 minutes, buy diapers and Pedialyte and get home. They have to go someplace else outside of the city. And that's adding 45 minutes to an hour to something that used to take 5 minutes. And so, people in East Palo Alto, they want the right sort of development. They want mixed use development. They want a lot more housing. If you do go door to door, and that's what I've been doing as a candidate, knocking on doors and talking to people, you can just see how many roommate situations there are and how many people are just getting thrown together randomly because there aren't apartments.
I see that all the time, being in real estate. So yeah, I see that all the time. Well, I do, see that, when you talk development specifically in East Palo Alto, it's a kind of a very, very contentious, I guess. Everyone's like, well, I want to see development, but they also don't want to see, affordable. They want to see affordability, that kind of thing. How would you address that particular?
I think, okay, so one of the basic fundamental things is we have a housing shortage, right? Yep. There are too many people and not enough houses. You don't get out of a housing shortage by not building more housing. You need to build a lot more housing. Parking is another issue.
There's cars everywhere. Yeah.
and it's really hurting the quality of life. Like, I've talked to a lot of people who regret living in East Palo Alto because, they can't, like there was a neighbor of mine. She's a 85-year-old black lady who's lived in East Palo Alto forever. And she has been going on very publicly about how she regrets living in East Palo Alto because in her golden years, she can't have her friends over for dinner because there's no place for them to park. And they're all around her age. They're not going to walk 10 blocks or a circle to find parking. And it's really sad. The city needs to have firm rules on parking like every other community. Menlo Park has rules. Palo Alto has rules. One of the things...
Well, I know in East Menlo Park, I believe there's a permit system, right? And limited times, is that correct?
No, they don't allow overnight parking.
They just don't allow overnight parking.
Yeah, okay. And so what happens is people from East Menlo park in East Palo Alto. People from Palo Alto park in East Palo Alto. Work trucks from all over the area park in East Palo Alto because we don't control for parking. And I mean, as one person on city council, I can't just wave a wand and get with Donald Shope, the parking guru, and say, what are we going to do? You got to have something that has buy-in from the community. But most people are fed up with the parking situation. They see it as very chaotic, and you can't plan on doing anything because there's never space for having people over to park. But the other thing about it is they see their neighbors abusing the common space. If there's one house that has 6 work trucks on it and they're parking their plumbing trucks there, then that's not parking that the other people can use. And this is all common space. It wasn't paid for by one house. Yeah. Or if you have one house that has 15 cars associated with it, 15 cars you have it. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, how does that affect the neighbors? And, other cities have firm rules on how many cars you can have. And I think East Palo Alto should have some limits on vehicle.
I agree. One of the things I see with people driving around and looking at properties, like, especially on some of the streets like Laurel, Jervis, Westminster, the streets are just constructed really narrow, and you just see a ton of cars parked on it. Some of them are a bit wider, and you don't feel the effect as much, but you do notice it.
It's very different from one part of the city to the other. So, if you go on Clark Avenue or Pulgus, there's, the streets are nice and wide. But if you go into the gardens and other places, it's twisty little streets, and they weren't really built with the idea that there would be parking everywhere. They were built with the idea that you have mom and dad and maybe 1 or 2 cars parked in the driveway.
So with that being said, I have kind of a follow-up question for you, and I don't know the exact answer for this because I don't know the full city code and stuff like that, but I know that there is some limitation as to how many cars or what percentage of driveway you can have on a house, right?
Okay.
Right. So you're limited, I think, in that respect. Is that something that you would look at changing or adjusting so people could put more driveway space on their front yard, more parking space on their house, so it's not in the street?
I think at some point you have to say, look, these are single family home neighborhoods and you have to have code enforcement and there's certain standards as a city. I don't have a strong feeling for or against that. Yeah. But I do think that the counter argument would be like, look, this is not a hotel. You have room for 4 cars in your driveway. Why do you need to have more than 4 cars for a 3-bedroom house?
Yeah.
And I think that's a legitimate question. I'll get some pushback on it, but there's going to be people watching this video who are going to be shouting, hallelujah, this is what we need. There's a lot of reasons to build more housing and give people a more dignified existence. And so right now we have a city council that's blocking new housing production. They're saying we don't want new housing. We don't want apartments. We don't want this, and we don't want to look at what other cities are doing to alleviate the housing shortage.
Just out of curiosity, why do you think they're taking that position?
It's definitely an ideological. They're terrified of gentrification, and in a lot of ways, we have the worst of gentrification. We have super high housing prices, and yet we don't have anything to come along with it. We don't have the nice stuff that people associate with gentrification. In fact, EPA has less restaurants now than it did when Whiskey Gulch was in place.
Yeah.
That took out a ton of the small business space, and it hasn't been replaced. So, I think it's definitely, we have people running the city who are ideologically driven. They're not trying to get stuff done. They're trying to stop stuff from getting done because they think if East Palo Alto is nice, people would want to live here. And that's a toxic governing philosophy. It's how we end up with $149 million in the bank. Because if you're thinking, well, if we improve if we put in sidewalks, that's going to make people want to live in East Palo Alto. There's a whole lot of people in EPA, they've lived here all their lives.
Yep.
They're going to live here all their lives. They want sidewalks. They want parks. They want nice stuff. They don't want to have to go to.
Well, people aren't forced to buy or sell from what I see, unless there's some kind of life-changing circumstance. So I don't personally, I'm just saying from a real estate perspective as well, right? As you said, your 85-year-old neighbor, right?
Yeah.
And she's been there and she's going to be there, right? And if she gets a park or a, sidewalk or, better parking, that's going to help her. And that doesn't affect, whether she moves or stays, and doesn't, she gets the benefits of the gentrification.
Well, and there's a ton of people in that, if you're under rent control, you're probably not going anywhere. If you own your house, you're not going anywhere. And, it's interesting, talking to the renters, because I'm canvassing, and probably half the people I talk to are renters. They also don't want to have to go to Menlo Park to go to Trader Joe's or to go to Target, Redwood City and Target. They want stuff in the community. They want nice parks. One of the things that that's upsetting about East Palo Alto is we have all this divisive stuff like OPA. We have, we have the East Palo Alto Sanitary District, and, people are really divided about stuff. And at the end of the day, most people in East Palo Alto are pretty unified about wanting to have a high quality of life. Nobody wants to be woken up by fireworks at 3:00 in the morning on May 20th. It's one thing, it's 4th of July. Okay, we get that, or Cinco de Mayo or whatever. But, these random fireworks, are terrible. They're terrible if you have a job, which is like 95% of all adults. Yeah. They're terrible if you're a kid. They're terrible if you have a dog or you are a dog. If there's any dogs watching, I hope I get your vote. But but it is. It's people don't want this stuff. They want nice stuff, and they want to live in a vibrant community. And part of having a vibrant community is having a functioning government that's doing stuff like music in the parks, that's doing stuff like, fixing water, putting in sidewalks, upgrading our parks, building a library. I don't know anybody in East Palo Alto that wouldn't like to have a community center on top of the library.
These are the kind of things that you think about. Why is this not happening? Why are people, is it just the mentality? Is that the main reason you think? Yeah,
I think it's a mentality. I think, it was true maybe a generation ago that you couldn't do these things. East Palo Alto's changed.
Yeah.
They have money in the bank. There's a lot of money in the bank. 149 million last time I checked. Yeah. That's a lot of money. That's 4 times our annual budget, right? Yeah. And I did sit down. I did sit down with our finance director a couple times. Yeah. And said, explain this to me. He's like, well, you have 22 million, which can be spent on anything tomorrow, right? Then you have a reserve fund. We absolutely need a reserve fund. But then there's all these other subsets of money. It's like there's like 13 million for housing. Free and clear, it could be spent tomorrow on housing. So if you wanted to do a first-time homebuyer program to help long-term residents buy single-family homes, you could do it with that money. You don't need something like OPA. And what they don't realize is that 70% of homes are owned by EPA residents. So if you have a house in East Palo Alto, you better be concerned about OPA because there are people running for it. That's Carlos, that's Ophelia, that's Webster Lincoln. They are in favor of OPA and they will pass that in about 30 seconds if they get elected into office.
I see a lot of land, just empty land in East Palo Alto in general that I think, has prime for, just solving that issue.
Yeah, I mean, Bain University, they have a mixed use development that was, to the code. And the city comes in and says, right, you can't build that. We want to cut it in half. And the design was for mixed use, which was first floor retail, a library, new library, some office space, and then a lot of housing, right?
Yeah.
And the city has come in and Sandhill has walked away from that. And they said, look, we're not building it. You can't, they paid something like $40 million for this property based on it being a certain density and a certain height. And when the city comes in and cuts that stuff in half, it's not like the city has much leverage. They're just saying, no, we're not building. And it's a tremendous loss to the community. I mean, it's something like $2.5 million in property taxes every year for the city. I mean, that's almost 10.
And the land's just going to sit there empty in the meantime.
Yeah, the city's going to sit there empty, but it's union jobs that would have built that property. It's something like 2,400 years of labor. Like they'd be employing a lot of people for 2 years, building that. So, I mean, that's like a lot, the unions want to build stuff.
Well, especially I know East Palo Alto has a lot of people that work in labor, right?
Yeah, they have a lot of construction people.
Yeah.
There's a huge need for first floor retail, right?
Oh,
I mean, restaurants.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the questions I always, been asking people is like, where do you go on a date in East Palo Alto?
Nowhere. Right? You go to Palo Alto.
You go to Palo Alto, you go to Mountain View, Redwood City, Menlo Park, I mean, maybe if you're getting married, you go to the Four Seasons once,
Yeah. Just to be clear, I think what we're talking about as well is, there's, as I said, a ton of empty land and it's just sitting there empty,
It's
not being
completely
utilized.
empty.
And you're just talking about optimizing it and using that for the community and improving the community specifically. You're not talking about moving people out of their homes. You're not talking about forcing or anything like that. Just to be clear, because I feel like some people get that impression when you hear the word gentrification or you talk, about development, people say, oh, well, you're going to make it unaffordable. It's going to make the place more expensive. And you're just talking about optimizing it and increasing the supply to actually lower the cost.
Yeah, I mean, if you build more housing, the price of housing goes down. It's proven. I mean, this is not like some vague, pseudoscience. When even something like building an ADU, I was talking to somebody the other day, going door to door. You hear a lot of stories, and one of them was like he's trying to build an ADU. The city had made a bunch of mistakes in the floor area ratio. It ended up costing him like $50,000 in architecture things to build an ADU in his backyard.
Wow. Yeah.
And I mean, we have a city that we need to expedite permitting. We need to make it so you can go. Some cities, Mayor Pete City in Indiana, they have like a menu of ADUs and types of buildings.
That are already pre-approved.
They're already pre-approved. We should do that in East Palo Alto.
Yeah, I don't know why something like that hasn't been done, to be honest. That sounds like a great...
I mean, other cities are doing it. We can learn from them. But I mean, if you were to say, hey, I'm going to do an ADU and I'm going to take model 25B here in Paisley or something, in green, then, okay, that's pre-approved. 30 days, bam, here's your fee, do it. But right now we have where everything has kind of like a bespoke process where it just takes forever, permitting takes forever.
It does.
Yeah. And
I can tell you from personal experience.
Yeah, and I mean, that's dumb. I mean, we're talking about an ADU. It's not that complicated as long as it meets health and safety. But I want to get back to parking.
Yeah.
Because, you can't build more housing if you don't take care of parking.
Yeah.
You can't build all these ADUs and more housing and just say, yeah, you guys can bring as many cars as you want. No, it doesn't work that way. The first thing we need to do as a city is address our out of control parking. We need to make sure that people are responsible and that they're not storing work vehicles. There aren't vehicles from Palo Alto. There aren't vehicles from Menlo Park stored in East Palo Alto.
I actually see that as well. You were saying, people from East Menlo Park specifically park in East Palo Alto because they can, right? They park all their work trucks there. Yeah. One thing I did want to ask you was just kind of about the community and safety and policing and that kind of stuff, and see what your thoughts were on that in general. You talked a little bit about kind of crime and safety and that kind of stuff, but
yeah, I think the good news is that East Palo Alto in 2023 did not have a murder. That's a huge, oh my God.
It's funny that's what makes the headlines, but yes.
Yeah. That being said, I think we need more enforcement. Things like shoplifting. Target closed. Whatever the actual reason was, shoplifting was part of it. They had a tremendous amount of shoplifting and bad behavior at that store. And maybe they closed for other reasons, but we need to make sure that shoplifting laws are enforced. Police response time is something that I hear about a lot. When people call the police and they take 2 hours to get back. I mean, this was just the other day. Somebody had stolen a car, dumped it on one of our neighbors' driveway, and the police took 2 hours to show up, even though this car was blocking a driveway. You know, like they couldn't get out.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, why wouldn't you come when you're getting a call like that? That's not quite the same as, you know, somebody's been shot, but you know, it's also like kind of a high priority. It shouldn't take an hour and a half, 2 hours to get there. The other thing is like, you know, speed bumps and other traffic calming measures. If people want that in the community, and we should make it a lot easier for streets to install, you know, speed bumps, because you know, you don't want to live on a street where people are going 70 miles an hour down, you know.
Yeah, or they're doing donuts.
Or doing donuts, or,
I've seen that.
You know, these motorcycles going, you know, super fast. You know, nobody wants that, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, it's you know, it's very few people in the community who are doing this, but other folks, you know, just, they don't want it, you know. And they want a city that supports them, not the 22-year-old who's getting high and drunk and speeding his car on running meat or pulgas. You know, they want limits on bad behavior.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's common sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there? I think we covered a lot of topics, and that was super informative and awesome to hear. Kind of, you know, what your thoughts are. Is there anything else, just in general, that you think would be worth, you know, talking about or mentioning?
I think there are a couple issues. You know, one of the things of being a parent, you know, raising a 14-year-old who's a big boy now, but he was a baby at one point. I think having people on council who are going to advocate for kids is super important. And right now we don't have that. You know, we have 3 single men who have never changed a diaper in their life, as far as I can tell, on council. I'd like to think that, you know, bringing a parent's perspective to seeing these issues, because frankly, you know, unsafe streets for walking and biking around town for kids, that hits differently when it's your kid. You know, when you go to the parks and the bathrooms are locked off, that hits differently when you're that parent and you're like, oh, go pee in the bushes. You know, I led an effort to get the park bathrooms open, and it succeeded. But it took like a couple of years. You know, when you are, you know, a parent and you get woken up by fireworks and your kid can't get back to sleep at 3 o'clock in the morning, it hits differently. And I think one of the reasons why, you know, we have a council that's been really inactive on a whole lot of things is that they don't feel the problems. They're not raising kids. They don't have dogs. So they're not like, hey, you know, why are there no dog poop bag stations on the trail? I'm a dog owner. I got those dog poop bag stations installed on the trail when I'm part of the Public Works Commission. I walk on the trail. I would say, like, the first thing, you know, if you start a Parks and Rec department, there's not going to be 100 people in the chamber shouting at city council members. You'll be like, yeah, that's a good idea. You know, there's a whole lot of low-hanging fruit that we can do in EPA that's going to bring the community together.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for your time. I'm always happy to talk for, you know, about East Palo Alto. I think there's you know, EPA has if we do things right, EPA has an incredibly bright future, where it's going to become, you know, like just an amazing place to live with stuff to do, abundant housing, and, you know, a really diverse and wonderful population. I mean, that's why we like living there.